Hey, welcome to What You Doin' with Brandon Horwin.
And Sophie Williams. And today's special guest is.
Hi, Brandon and Sophie. Thanks for inviting me. I'm Walter Bobbie, an alumni of Catholic University, where I had a very happy 2 years, very productive 2 years. I'm an actor, director, writer, one-time artistic director. I'm sort of a man of many hats. But I began my career in New York City as an actor. I did a whole bunch of bombs, and then I was in the original cast of Grease back in 1972. And I've continued to act over the years, including a major revival of Guys and Dolls in '92 with Nathan Lane and Faith Prince, in which I played Nicely Nicely. And the most recent thing I've done on Broadway was a revival of St. Joan with Condola Rashad, the Manhattan Theater Club, directed by Dan Sullivan. In between, I've directed a lot of, I was the artistic director over at Encores at City Center. From there, I moved to Chicago to Broadway, where it is still running and has had an international life and will open again this October. The most recent thing I directed on Broadway was the Steve Martin, Edie Brickell musical called Bright Star. And the last play I directed on Broadway was David Ives' Venus in Fur. And I'm about to go to London. I was away later, stopped because of COVID. And I was 2 days away from tech of Christopher Durang's Vanya and Sonia and Masha and Spike on the West End. So I will go back and open that up in October. I'm about to record a new radio play by David Ives in 2 days with Hank Azaria and Jonathan Groff. I just keep doing all kinds of things. And I just finished acting in a mini-series that we recorded in Virginia. We filmed in Virginia from January to last week about the opioid crisis in America, and it's called Dope Sick. It will star Michael Keaton, and I play one of the Sackler brothers, owners of Purdue Pharma. It's a powerful story about the opioid crisis in America and the implications that it brought to the merchandising, the marketing of Purdue Pharma, and how they exploited that horrible situation in this country. That's probably not as brief as you'd like, but basically, I sort of do all kinds of things, and I feel very privileged about that, very lucky about that I've got to wear as many hats or play in as many yards as I have in the Broadway community, and I feel rather privileged by my experience.
Thank you for that introduction, and thanks for joining us here on What You Doin' today. We're thrilled to be talking with you and highlighting your career. So I first want to start out with, can you just tell us a little bit about your journey to theater, how you got your start, how you knew that this is the business that you wanted to grow your career in, and where some of the roads led you to climb up the ladder?
I went to a small Jesuit college, the University of Scranton, where I was born in Scranton, and I was a business major. And then I switched out of that after a year and was an English major, minor in philosophy. But I always did it, but there was no theater department. I always did the school shows, whatever they were. And I've been doing whatever, since kindergarten, I was in that school play, singing I'm a Little Dutch Boy. Memorable. Thank God there was no cell phones back then to film it, but yes, I did. I had little wooden clogs and sang I'm a Little Dutch Boy. But anyway, I got to my senior year, and I knew I wanted to do it. In my sophomore year, I came to New York for the New York World's Fair. And that weekend, I saw 2 Broadway shows in one day. I saw How to Succeed in Business on Broadway, and I saw a revival of The Glass Menagerie with the great Maureen Stapleton. And I practically had to hold myself in my chair. I just wanted to leap up on stage and join it. And I was a sophomore in college at that point, and I knew I wanted to come back to New York, and I wanted to do that. I finished college and I went to Catholic University where I majored in theater. And the minute I finished, I came to New York and started looking for work. I think I remember when I was in the 8th grade, my dad and mom bought me a record player, high fidelity, whatever we used to call them back then. And they bought me a few albums. And one of the albums was Oklahoma, the soundtrack of the film of Oklahoma. And they didn't buy it because of any purpose, but I think one of my cousins worked at Decca Records and they got it at discount. But for some reason, I played that record over and over and over. And I started buying theater albums and memorizing the way kids memorize baseball cards. I knew all the stats. I knew who did the orchestrations and the dance arrangements. And I didn't study that stuff. I just absorbed it so that when something like the opportunity for encores came up, I didn't have to do any research. It had been my life's passion. And so suddenly I had an opportunity to do these concert revivals of great American musicals, and it was just bliss for me. But I would say the flags that I noticed was when I got that Christmas, I got that recording of Oklahoma. And then my cousin taking me to the Comerford Theater in Scranton to see Singing in the Rain. And then coming to New York with a bunch of guys from the university. And we stayed at my parents' house in New Jersey by then. And I came in and saw those shows and I went, this is it. This is what I want to do. And naively, I just thought, well, then just go do it. And I did. My career is not a how-to manual on how to do it. I was blissfully innocent and naive about how it all happens, but it worked.
Yeah, so you briefly spoke about Catholic University, our alma mater. So what was some of the work that you did there that you think set you up for the next steps in your career?
Well, I don't know. I never really trained, but for some reason I was able to sing and dance. So it always put me into the musicals. And Father Hartke was very fond of me. Father Hartke did great things for me. The legendary Father Hartke, of course, now well deceased. But I was in a Christmas musical and that went thanks to the Department of Defense and toured all the German bases one of the years I was there. And also Father Hartke made me part of a grant by the Department of State to run some tutorials at the University of Poznan in Poland while I was there. There were 3 of us who joined 6 Fulbright scholars who were already in Europe. And it was very, it was very encouraging. I was cast, I was around a lot of more classically oriented actors than I. But nonetheless, in class, I got to do wonderful work, Arthur Miller, the other stuff that we do. And there were some very, very interesting experimental things that we did. I remember John Procaccino, John, whatever his last name was, adapted 3 medieval morality plays into a rock musical to the lyrics of William Butler Yeats. I mean, it was just everything. And it was a can of soup, this musical, but it was experimental and invigorating and demanding. So we did everything from, revival of Anything Goes with James Summerhays, who was also in my class, who came to New York and worked on Broadway.
She was also on our podcast recently.
Oh, she was, yeah. And I don't know, there was a wonderful, I just had a wonderful experience there. The thing is, I was cast and I was encouraged. And the other thing that happened is my first year there, then Professor Brady cast me in at Olney. So I got my equity card at Olney doing Life with Father. I played the oldest son, Clarence. They dyed my hair orange. And I got my equity card. And right after that, I went to Poland. And then I finished my second year and I came to New York. I can only say that it was fulfilling and encouraging. And I had the same experience when I came to New York. And I don't know why, good fortune or naivete, but you know, I have a friend, this Australian priest, and he sometimes hears me talk, and he said, "I always knew God loved you, but he seems to be crazy about you." So yeah, yeah. I've also had the instinct to do whatever I thought I should be doing next, to change my direction. I mean, when I came to New York, I literally, my sister and I came to town and saw a show called Dames at Sea. And I thought it was a riot. I thought it was hilarious. It started originally Bernadette Peters. And I said to my sister, when I go to New York, I want to do that show. That's going to be the first show I do. So I came to New York. I went down to the Theater de Lys with my picture and resume. I don't recommend this. I don't know why I wasn't thrown out, but I knocked on the door and I said, "Can I speak to the stage manager?" And they said, "What do you want?" I said, "Just let me speak to the stage manager." And he came out and I gave him my picture and resume and I said, "Don't throw this away. Call me. It's really a good idea for you to call me for this job." And they did, and I got the job. And then that director, Neil Kenyon, gave me my first Broadway show, which lasted one night. It was a terrible show called Frank Merrivale, which I celebrated the 50th anniversary of my Broadway debut last month.
Wow.
And,
congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. And we had some people over and I pulled, it's the only theater poster I still have. And we hung it up in the living room and I sang the title song and read a little of the original horrendous review of Frank Merrivale. And it was just a joyous memory.
Yeah. So going off that a bit, you played Roger, as you mentioned briefly in your intro, in the original Broadway cast, the 1972 production of Grease, starring alongside some many great talents: John Travolta, Judy Kay, who was on our podcast recently, Marilu Henner, Patrick Swayze, and the great Jerry Zaks. So at this time, did you know that Grease would go on to become this big, huge hit that it did? And what was your time? What was your time like for that show? With that show, did it sort of have a springboard effect for you and a big launch off for your career after that?
Well, I had done 3 or maybe 4 disastrous shows in a row that year, but I kept getting hired, so that was encouraging, even though the shows didn't work. I don't know that anybody knows that they're in a hit. We had a lot of work to do in Greece. There were many things to overcome, but we had a great, great time. It was exhilarating. And I don't even think the critics were all that fond of it, but you couldn't keep the audience from coming. You couldn't swat them away with a stick. And I don't think they even got it. And when the Schuberts moved us uptown, I don't think they even believed in the show, but they had an empty theater because back then the theaters were empty in the city. You can get a theater in a minute. And I think they brought us up as an interim booking for the summer. And then the people kept coming. And so they finally moved us around from the Biltmore around the corner to the Royale, where we parked for many, 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 many years. I did the show for about 7 months. And then I got another terrible job, which I took because there was a very elegant group of people involved. It was a show called Tricks, and it was an adaptation of Molière's Scapin. And it starred René Bergenois. The producer was Herman Levin, who was the producer of My Fair Lady. The costume designer was miles light to it, done everything from around the world in 80 days to, I think Oklahoma. I mean, it was just a legendary gathering of people. And so I did that. It didn't work. And the producers of Grease called me while I was in Detroit, and they say, "We hear your show stinks. You want to come back?" So I came back to New York, and we opened and closed the show, and I went back into Grease for about another year and a half. And so I guess all told, I did that show perhaps 2 years and change, and the friendships. I just was texting with Barry Bostwick last week. I just got a phone call from Jim Canning this morning. I'm about to send something to Adrienne Barbeau. Mary Lou Henner and I were in communication. I mean, we could call any of each other anytime, and we bonded in a remarkable way. In fact, we do these Zooms. One of those casting directors puts together anybody who's part of Grease. We have another one coming up in about a few weeks. And if you were part of Grease, whenever you get on the Zoom and there's, 30, 40 people telling stories. And Tom Moore is putting together, the director is putting together a book called Tell Me More, Tell Me More. And he's asked any of us who were part of it to write stories, legends, memories. And I've written about 10 or 12 little things. I don't know if any of them be in the book, but there was a bonding that happened when those kinds of shows happen, where there are no stars, where everybody has a great part. I bet the same thing is true of the cast of Godspell and Hamilton and Chorus Line. You all have equally good parts, and you're all young, and something magical that transforms your life happens, and you become overnight part of show business, Broadway theater. So I think those casts, those young casts that are brought together, have an experience that will be lifelong,
Absolutely. And while we're sort of on the subject of Jerry Zaks' work, you went on to star as Nicely Nicely Johnson in his 92 iconic revival of Guys and Dolls. So what was it like working with Jerry Zaks from another angle here, you as a performer and him as the director? And can you tell us a little bit about your experience in this iconic revival of a beloved classic?
Jerry, I wanted to direct too, and I was really stunned and indeed envious of what had happened to Jerry, how quickly he became such a legendary director in New York. And I remember auditioning him for him at one point, and I thought I nailed it, and he didn't hire me. I thought, oh, he's never going to hire me. And then he called me, and he asked me to replace in Anything Goes, which I was thrilled to do, his revival at Lincoln Center. And I thought, oh, that's so wonderful. And then Jerry's been such an important part of my trajectory in the business. And then he asked me to replace in Assassins. Terry Mann had to take a 2-3 week leave of absence in the middle of Assassins, and Jerry said, "Would you go in for Cholgosh?" And I said, "Yes, if you'll put me into the show." And then we did that. And then they said, "We want you to audition for Nicely Nicely." And usually, it's played by a large man, a Stubby K type. And I said, "Does Jerry know about this?" He said, "Yeah, Jerry asked for you." And so I went in, and he cast me, and there were a lot of sort of husky, overweight tenors in New York City who were very pissed off at me for taking what had been legendarily cast in a different way. And then when I was in Guys and Dolls, I had an opportunity. This is when I knew I really wanted to direct. I had an opportunity to direct a review called A Grand Night for Singing. To put together a review of Rodgers and Hammerstein thing for the Rainbow and Stars. And I was in a hit and I had a great part. And I nonetheless asked Jerry if he would give me a leave of absence, and he did, because he knew, as he knew with himself, how much it meant to me. And I did this little review, and the critics all came and they said, oh yeah, this guy can direct. And that really was the launch of my professional directing career. And then the Roundabout picked it up, and it's a nice review of Rodgers and Hammerstein stuff. So Jerry has been significant in my career. And when I got the opportunity to direct Fiorello, which is the premiere show that we did at Encores, I asked Jerry to play Fiorello LaGuardia, because Jerry had like 3 Tonys, and I knew him as an actor as well. And I said, if Jerry says yes, it'll be like getting the imprimatur. Everyone will follow. And once Jerry said yes, the cast included Adam Arkin and Faith Prince and Donna McKechnie. And I mean, it was you couldn't get that cast on board. Anybody who was of any merit back then in 1992 just joined the party. So Jerry has had a significant, collegial, generous, supportive kind of impact on my career that I can't be more grateful for than. It's been remarkable. It's been remarkable. And he's great to work with, that's without question, and he's a remarkable talent in his own right. And I feel no sense of real competition. I just feel gratitude, and he gets the jobs he's supposed to get, and I get the jobs I'm supposed to get. But he really helped me at key points in my life. And I don't know what else to say about that.
Well, that's great. Kind of transitioning here, you spent your career kind of transition from spending time on stage to then behind the director's table, more or less running the show. So what made you decide to make this career change? And do you now have a specific process you use for directing?
You know, whatever I was doing, I love actors and I loved hanging out with actors, but I was always wanted to really go out after the show with the writers and the directors. I think the process of acting is very narrow and very deep. And I think the process of directing is shallow and wide. I'm kidding, but you get to engage with all the people in the creative team, the designers, the writers, the composers, the lyricists. And you get to tell not just your story, but a story. And I liked that. I really wanted to do that. And I also wanted to see if I could be useful, if I had something to offer. So sort of during those early times, I'd say, you know, if you get an audition or if you're working on a scene, if I can come over, if I can help you, I'll help. So I never really assisted anyone. I never went to school for directing, but I was always working with very good directors. I mean, even a show that didn't succeed was called A Grass Harp with the legendary Barbara Cook, if no one else. And the director was the great Ellis Rabb. Well, the show didn't work, but I was watching Ellis Rabb direct. I was listening to Jonathan Tunick doing his first set of Broadway orchestrations. Even when it was a mess, I was in the room with remarkable people. So I was always in class in some ways with very, very good people. And if you're not unless you've studied and you've been training and you're assisting and all, being an associate, all that was not my case. And when I really wanted to see if I could direct, a friend of mine had written a one-act play called Meet for Lunch, about 3 women on the Upper West Side of Manhattan who meet for lunch. And I went over to Triad. It's now called Triad. It's where they did Forever Plaid and Forbidden Broadway, and it's a little cabaret across the street from me. And I said, can I do Meet for Lunch at brunch on Sundays for a month? And they said, sure. I don't know where I got this instinct, but I decided to hire myself. And I put together a budget of $1,000, because a friend of mine said, if you know what you do with $1,000, you know what to do with $1 million. And I didn't put my own money in. I got 5 investors to each invest $200. And I put together a budget. I think I paid myself $19 or $23, and all the actors got paid. And of course, back then, the advertising budget was not, Facebook. It was sending out those little posters. And I gave myself a class in how to create work, and no one was going to hire me, so I hired myself. We did well. We ran for a month. All the investors got back $186. Everybody lost about $14. And it was a great training for me. Why it occurred to me to do these things, I have no idea, but they occurred to me and I did them. And I think they were in some ways more beneficial than any class I could have taken in producing or directing. I mean, and so that when things like Encores came to me and they asked me to be artistic director, I had a sense of how to delegate, how to choose, and how to make these things. Suddenly I did have $1 million, and I knew how to spend it. I think you go to school as you have, and you get a wonderful education, but then you just have to go bump your shins all over the world and learn things. And I believe that the most important thing you can do is get in the room. And if you can get in the room with good people, people who are smarter than you, it's the best thing you can do.
Absolutely. So you also directed the 96 revival Chicago. So what was it like for you taking this, beloved, iconic show and bringing it back on the stage? And did you expect it to run as long as it is currently running and taking to audiences still 25 years later?
I was, when I was at Encores, I was still sort of making my living as an actor, because they gave me an opportunity, but they didn't give me a grand salary. And I got to that 3rd season, and I was supposed to direct something. Once I was artistic director, I was going to direct the first show, which was Call Me Madam. And I decided to fire myself. I decided to not direct once I became an artistic director. I thought my job was to select the season and to hire other people and to make sure that the idea of Encores was clarified, and that my job was to be artistic director, not hire yourself producer. So I fired myself. I insisted on bringing in writers for every project we did. And I was following my instincts in terms of choices. And of course, I was working with the great Rob Fisher and Judith Dakin. But by the time we got to the 3rd season, I wanted a show for myself. For the end of the 3rd season, I thought we had established our identity enough. And I was acting in in Stephen King's Thriller in Camden. And I had a pile of scripts. I'm going to go do my scenes. Then I come back to my hotel and I was reading scripts. And I read I've always loved the score of Chicago. What brought me in was the album. What brought me in was that score, which I thought was astonishing. And I had always loved Fosse, because the first Broadway show I saw was How to Succeed in Business, and he did the dances. So I'd always been, anyway, I am up there, and I'm also watching the OJ trial and reading the script of Chicago and going, this could have been written now. It seemed so relevant. It was about the abuse of power, the manipulation of celebrity, even in a court of law. And it felt current. And so I didn't want to revive Mr. Fosse's production. I wanted to sort of make it more contemporary. And Cantor Network, they just gave us the rights to do it. They were hands off. They didn't see it until the opening night at Encores. And I called Annie and I said, I would like to do this with you. And we don't want to do Bob's production, but we want to do an homage to Mr. Fosse. So there are images in the show that I had seen in Pippin and in all that, that we just collected visual ideas that were part of his language. And I remember his agent at the time, he said, if Bob was alive today, this is how he would do it. But I always felt that Fosse was in some ways in the room and we were paying tribute to him. And then Anne and I, we did a workshop of 3 numbers with her students. We couldn't do it with equity. We were Encores, we didn't have the money, but she was teaching. And we did a lab where she did 3 numbers in the style of Fosse. The most significant breakthrough for us was when we did Cell Block Tango, which was originally done behind jail bars. And I said, we should do this with 6 bentwood chairs like cabaret. And so we got out 6 bentwood chairs and we knew that we could make it look like that was Bob Fosse's Cell Block Tango, but indeed it was Anne Reinking paying tribute to Bob Fosse. And that's how we approached doing this thing. But we were doing it because I loved the score and I thought the show was relevant. And but I didn't do it because I thought it was going to run for 25 years. I just did it for the same reason I did Call Me Madam. I just thought Call Me Madam is an astonishing score that can't be revived. It is so stuck in its period that it can't be revived, but it's a great Irving Berlin score. But the opening first performance at Encores, they played the opening trumpet and the audience went nuts. Joel Grey was standing in the wings and Jimmy Naughton, they go, what the hell is happening? And it was like fireworks exploded and the curtain went up and the audience erupted like they had been waiting for it. I just went, oh, wow. And Cantor and Ed were there that night and they were equally blown away because they hadn't seen it since the original production. Fosse could never really get a film of it off the ground for some reason. And no one had any expectations about it. They hadn't come to rehearsals or anything. They just came over to see this concert. And I knew that we were having a great time. I knew that the work between Rob Fisher and Annie and I was spontaneous combustion. We had ideas, we just went with them, And just like the overture, the original overture is not staged. And I said, Anne, that's a great piece of music. We're going to stage it. We're going to have everybody come out one at a time, show off, and then turn into this unit. But it all looked like it was Fosse's production, but a lot of those things were not part of the original way the show was delivered. But we knew that we weren't off base because Anne is, first of all, she's of the poor, late, dear Anne. God, losing her so young this year was just horrible. But we knew we wouldn't get off base because Anne's understanding, Anne's mentorship with Fosse, Anne's love of him, and the originality of his work was somehow downloaded into her very fiber. And every instinct she had, she brought in tribute to him. And any ideas I brought to her, she seized, and it was blissful. It felt like the 3 of us were in the room putting the show together, And so when you're doing that, you're not thinking, oh, is it going to run? Is it going to be a hit? You're just having this. And also when you get Anne to say yes, and Joel Grey to say yes, and Jimmy Naughton to say yes, and Bibi to say yes, you go, how bad could it be? if I get them on and off the stage and the spotlight hits them, it's going to at least be something. But it ended up being something more. And it ended up having a great team. The work that, you know, the subtle and amazing work that's even someone like John Lee Beatty in the set, which seems inevitable and seems like nothing, was a lot of thought and process. And but we were just kids. We were just the kids down the hall, and it worked.
Yeah.
So I think you know you're in trouble when you go, oh, we got so and so, we got a new son, you know, hey, this is gonna work, and this is gonna be well more sets, and it's and we got blah blah blah. You know you're in trouble. Then you know you're in trouble. When you're the kids down the hall, you got a chance.
Well, in that same vein, you know, you've directed some super highly anticipated musicals like White Christmas, Footloose, and The Sweet Charity Revival, as well as Chicago. So with these all have something in particular, and that's they in some fashion have already kind of been done. So how have you as a director, you know, worked to kind of make them unique, make them their own production?
I think Footloose was an interesting journey. And, you know, it still gets done all the time. We just had a big meeting with Concord last week. It's still one of the top rental pieces in their catalog. It's going to go back out on Norwegian cruise lines. It gets done all over the world. I knew Dean Pitchford and I know each other as actors. We were both actors. I was in Grease, he was in Godspell, as young men in New York. And when they came to me with Footloose, we had a very, very good time because the film of Footloose is a soundtrack. Nobody sings in the movie Footloose. So we knew there was, and yet it's still one of the top selling albums ever, and it's got at least 5 iconic hits that are still being played in your local grocery store. So we had to find out how to take what was essentially a soundtrack and give it voice. And then, so we were committed to those 5 songs, and then he and Tom Snow were going to write the additional score. We knew we couldn't do the movie because in the movie, you know, people are riding on a truck and screaming while someone in the soundtrack is singing "I Need a Hero." So we had to find context for all of this. And we also realized that it was a great American story and a great family story. And I think that's why we just had a meeting. I think it's going to get done so much in the next couple of years because it's a feel-good musical, but the people really go through a lot to get to that good feeling. And post-COVID, I'm being told there's such interest in hearing the score. And the reason I think the show continues to work is not just that score, but it's about a boy who loses his father and a father who loses his son, and how they meet in this strange town and butt heads and finally move on. So there's a solid, it's not about whether you can dance or not, that's clearly a metaphor, but it's about healing, and it's about a community coming together. And that's why I think it is, I know it has had to continue to have such a strong international life, because there is a sweet, emotional story that holds all of those great songs together. So it felt like we were actually creating a new musical, because I think there are 5 songs from the film, but the score has, I don't know, 18, 17 songs. So they wrote, we developed it like we were doing a new musical. And there was a point where Dean and I were so deep into the work, he said, well, I guess we're writing this together, because at that point we were. It was his screenplay, but suddenly the 2 of us were actually writing the script. That was a wonderful, wonderful journey. It was a hard one, though. That one was hard. Um, uh, and I think adapting films is not, I think adapting films that already have a score attached to them is harder because there's an expectation of that, as opposed to, say, taking once, well, no, but that's not a bad example, but take a film that's been made into a musical where we have no oral expectation of it. White Christmas was a whole different thing. And White Christmas was truly a joyous experience because unlike most of what we do right now, there were no labs, there were no readings, there were no workshops. The producer said, we have the theater in San Francisco, we've got the Curran, and we got the rights, and go. And I brought in David Ives, and we were writing, designing, everything all at the same time. I remember calling Ana Luisos from the beach. I was walking along the beach one day and I said, stop designing the first 3 sets. We just got them. And we turned because the movie starts and they're at war, there are buildings falling down, there are explosions, jeeps are coming through, and we just put them at war, and we did a minute and a half of them putting on a show in the war zone, and then we switched to the Ed Sullivan show. So we had to compress the first 15, 20 minutes of a movie into a minute and a half opening into a big production number. And the thing about Irving Berlin is he didn't really write musicals except for Annie Get Your Gun and Call Me Madam. He wrote songs. He didn't really produce story shows, as he used to call them, I think. He was a songwriter. So when you go to his films, everybody suddenly stops and says, hey, let's do the Hawaiian number. And then they go out and they do the Hawaiian number. But it's not R&H or Frank Lesser. It doesn't come out of motivation or character. So it was tricky to figure out how we can get all these classic songs in and make them seem integrated in the way that they were not in the film, and to give everyone musical songs to sing, because not every character had songs. Then we introduced the little girl, we made the little girl happen. So that was fun. We were writing it, and after we did it in San Francisco, I said, well, that was our first preview. Now we have to wait till next year to do any of the fixes. But boy, that was a fun thing to put together. And it was also a great trust act, because I think that's the way musicals used to be put together. We got the Schubert, we got Merman, we got November, go. And people would do a show, and now there are readings and labs and workshops and all of that stuff. And in the old days, people did shows. Just like when I came to New York, the reason I did so many bombs is because they weren't workshopped, they weren't tried out. People got the rights, they got the money, and you went into rehearsal. And so it was interesting to do that one old school.
I would have to agree with, I did White Christmas in high school. It was just.
Oh, you did?
All the way around, yeah.
Who did you play?
I was Ezekiel Foster.
Ezekiel's one of those parts where I forget his name, the actor, and I said, there is no part here, but I promise you, if you hang in there with me, you will have the best time. And isn't it a wonderful part?
It's so funny because I got such an applause when I just did the eye up, like one line every few, in a few, every few scenes. And my director, who I miss dearly, and she was amazing and unfortunately passed away a few years ago, said the same exact thing, that if you stick with me with this role, you have like 10 lines that you'll see during the
and you'll steal the show.
It was
and
fun.
You also sing Snow on the train? You're sitting on the train, everybody's singing, and suddenly you go, Snow! And that was, we were getting a lot from the actors, and everybody ended up with every part is a little gem.
Absolutely. So before we wrap up, I just want to ask you, who is someone that has greatly inspired your professional career?
I'll tell you someone who more than inspired my professional career. I think I've had great teachers in my life. And I think that one person there are several people, my parents, obviously, my grandfather. But I had a Jesuit priest named Father Gannon, who I'm forever devoted to. And he was my private confessor. He was my mentor. He was my counselor. And I thought I was going to be a priest. I thought I was going to be a Jesuit. And one night he said to me, "You're not going to be a priest. You don't have the calling. I know it when I see it, and you don't have it. You're avoiding your life." And I will never forget that night. And he was right. And it was tough and generous. And he basically said, "You go out there and live, because this is not you." And that was impactful. Yeah, are there other people that inspired me and that were great? But if there's one person who just said, and that was in college, and clearly it helped me make the decision to go to graduate school of theater and to do what I really wanted to do. I've had great teachers in my life. Everybody I work with, I think is smarter than I am, and I learned something. We did a reading today. We were recording a new radio play that David Ives wrote. And over here this morning was Hank Azaria and Jonathan Groff. And, I directed and I learned. And David Ives, I mean, what a way to spend the morning. I sometimes open my phone book and I go, "Really? That's what I'm doing today?" It was just bliss. And it's a remarkable play. It's called Locked and Loaded. And we're going to record it for playing on air on Wednesday. It is funny, it's insightful, it's topical, and it's ultimately very moving. And what happens is Jesus walks into a gun shop to buy a gun. And it is a remarkable gem in about 16 pages. I love what I get to do. And sometimes I'm not making any money on this. Sometimes I make a lot of money, and sometimes I'm looking at the table going, "Jesus, look who's here." I love it. I just love it. I babbled on, I know, didn't even let you ask your questions. I'm so
No, that's an amazing note to end on. And congratulations. You've had and will continue to have a remarkable run in acting, directing, all of your endeavors. It's amazing. And it's great to talk to a fellow alum at this point. It's the first time we're able to say this publicly because we just graduated. So that's fun to say. But thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing your stories and your career. And you inspired us, and I know you'll inspire our audiences as well.
I hope.
Thank you so much, Walter. It's been great. And
I hope I didn't babble on too much, but I had coffee at lunch, so what are you going to do?